I'm super, super excited about this last session that we have this afternoon. I really enjoyed doing the research for this part, I have to say, because you're just brilliant in the way that you are bringing to life the whole concept of what Sarah and the whole team is doing with this. I spent really a very, very happy half an hour going over your site and just came away thinking, this is such a brilliant way to connect to people. So I'm going to take people back to the beginning, and then you're going to tell us how you did this and what gave you the idea.
Yeah.
So Katie Jones of Domaine Jones, you moved you moved to Languedoc in 2008. Is that right? And I believe you'd been working in wine prior to that. What made you want to launch yourself as an actual winemaker?
Yeah. So just say, firstly, I'm really, really honoured to be here with you, and thank you so much for inviting me. And I must admit, I was a little bit worried during the previous presentation because I was thinking, I don't know anything technical about old vines.
Good.
I
We
don't
can
know
just chat.
I really
Great.
don't know what my root stocks are on my old vines. I put the grape variety on every label. And I was just thinking, I'm the light entertainment at the end. And then I sort of thought, actually, Jean-Philippe said one thing which reassured me. He said, consumers need to pay more for this type of wine.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, that's basically explains, or hopefully that's why I'm here in a way.
And consumers will only do that when they realize the stories behind it and the emotional connection with them. And that's what I think you do just so brilliantly. I really do. So yes, so please do take us back to the beginning of the project. What gave you the motivation to first of all to move to Languedoc?
Okay, so I actually came down here a long time before 2008. I was down in 93.
Okay.
So I've been here over 25 years now. I did have a little presentation. I don't know. It was just really to show people.
Yeah, no, great. Let's have a presentation.
I don't know. I think Madeline's got it. It was just the first slide, which really shows the second slide, and just the map, just to sort of put it into context for people of where I'm actually talking to you from and where my vineyards are, which is the second slide. I think sometimes
I'm not in control, I'm afraid.
Delay. No, I'm not. I'm definitely
not. I can see the slide on my screen, but
okay. Sometimes there's a bit of a time delay, I think. But basically, yeah, what am I doing down here? Somebody from Leicestershire originally. And I actually started working in the wine trade for a wonderful man. So just a slide before that, called Thierry Caban, the one before. Yeah, that's it. Called Thierry Caban. And I started at a company called Thierry's based in Romsey. And that's really where I got the wine bug. And I did my WSET certificate. And then I just always wanted to be French. I love France. And I was offered a job right down in a little tiny village which is right down here on the map, which is in the Languedoc-Roussillon. So I'm basically on the border of Languedoc-Roussillon, but in the Languedoc.
And what was that job at the time?
So at the time, that job was to work at the local village cooperative in the village of Tuchan. So I came down to work there mainly as sales and then the marketing director in a tiny local cooperative who were producing Fitu at the time. And yeah, I loved it. I worked there for 15 years. I got a good feel for the village, the area, the quality of wines that were being produced, and just had a good time enjoying working in what I felt for me was like the perfect little village down in the south of France. I don't know if you've read Manon des Sources and Jean de Florette, but it's very much, that was me. I was Manon. I almost
hopefully not with as much heartache.
Well, no, not quite. There has been some, but not as much as hers.
And what were the grape varieties at the time that were going through the cooperative?
So in the cooperative system, as we know, it's mainly Carignan Grenache. So in the area where we are in the village of Tuchan, there's absolutely no irrigation. It's very dry. So you can only really grow vines that are adapted to that particular climate. So the traditional grapes. So we don't have any more modern grapes. We have Carignan, Grenache, some Syrah has been planted as well for the reds, and then most of the whites have actually been ripped up. So traditionally there would have been Grenache Blanc, Macabeu, but most of those have actually disappeared because of payments from the carve for the more expensive red grapes, which they found easier to sell.
Right. Yep. A problem across many regions. And so what was the thing, that the light bulb moment for you? What gave you the inspiration to go from working there to founding your own estate and doing it in the way that you have?
I think the initial motivation was that I could see in the cooperative system there were these small parcels of old grapes, old vines coming in, but they were just getting blended with everything else. So we never really got to taste that pure quality of the old vines. And then it was
being paid the same amount of money, I assume.
Yeah, that was another major. Although at Montoche, the cooperative was called Montoche at the time, they did have a differential payment system. So there was definitely a move towards rewarding growers who made a better quality wine. But that didn't. It lasted for about 10 years, and then the system sort of collapsed because it's very, very difficult to do in a cooperative system.
Because you're not getting the other end of the pipeline. You're not getting people paying more, I guess, for it.
Yeah, exactly, because it's from a co-op. At the end of the day, it's from a cooperative. So although some of the wines were really, really good, yeah, there is a sort of ceiling on the price that you can pay for a Southern French as well. So we're Southern French cooperative, little tiny.
Strike
almost,
one, strike two. It's hard to go from there. Yeah.
Yeah, and I've sort of fallen over by then.
Yeah. Okay. So then you saw this, and what was it that made you kind of connect with those grapes, particularly those old?
It was basically, so it's my parents from Ashby de la Zouch in Leicestershire who they said, could you buy us a vineyard? And it literally just started like that. I didn't have a big strategy. I've never had one in my life, a big project of, okay, let's do this. And they said, could you just buy us a vineyard? Because we'd like to do a bit of gardening when we come and see you. And to be honest, there's not much to do in Tuchan. There's only 800 people. So they just thought, if we've got a vineyard, we can go and potter in it. And that's how it started. So I went on.
Were they big gardeners at home?
Yes. So I went on a sort of search for the perfect vineyard. And I think the next slide is actually that vineyard.
We just caught yes, it does look stunning.
So
what are we looking at here?
Yeah, that's basically the village of Tuchan. So it's just to give you an idea of the sort of landscape. It's very empty, small parcels, small plots of vines. And then the next slide after that here. So this was the first vineyard that I basically fell in love with and purchased along with my parents in 2007. So that was the sort of start.
Can we ask, if you don't want to tell us exactly, but the bracket of price that you're paying per hectare in this part of France?
So this was quite a long time that I bought that. I can tell you now, we purchased a hectare last year of old vines, and we paid, it was about 5,000 euros for a hectare. That's 4,000 vines.
And there's no price premium for the age of the vines in terms of
a price premium. Did I hear that right? We pay for old vines. We pay about 75% less than new vines.
Okay. Oh, brilliant. Thank you. I'm so glad I asked that question. And one of the things that I loved that you say on your site was the sites are too small, too remote, and too much like hard work for basically anybody else to want them except for you.
It's exactly it. And that is the cooperative system as well. Unless there is this differential payment set up, it's very difficult to give growers enough money to actually work those old vineyards because they do take so much work.
Yep. Okay, so right from the start then you found this, you now have 12 hectares. How many hectares did you buy at this first point?
So to begin with, I just bought 2.5. So for me, that was actually my biggest vineyard that I had and that I still have. So 2.5 hectares. So I have now like 14 tiny plots that cover the 12 hectares. So this one of 2.5 was quite big, but that's what I started with. And I came at it. It wasn't for any scientific proven reason other than that. It had a great selection of different vines in there. I had Carignan, I had Grenache, I had Muscat, and I had Grenache Gris, all in the same plot. And for me, I just thought, wow, this is fascinating.
As a field blend. I mean, there was no...
They were in their different blocks, but in the same area and the same parcel. Whereas the half of the vineyard had been ripped up and replanted with young Grenache. And when I came to buy it, I just met my husband, Jean-Marc, who's a farmer down here. And he said, obviously, you're going to buy the bit that's just been ripped up and replanted. And I was like, no, I want the other bit that's planted so you can get a horse through it and you can't get a modern day tractor in. But there's lots of different grape varieties. And basically, that was it. There was no specific reason. If we go on to the next photo as well, you can see what I just fell in love with it. I just knew as soon as I walked in to that vineyard.
When you bought it, were those grapes being vinified separately, or were they ending up as a blend?
They were ending up in a blend
with younger vines, I mean.
Oh, yeah. Yes, they would have been blended together at the local cooperative. This was in Moree, so he would have picked the old and the young Grenache vines together. If I don't know, if Madeleine's there for the next photo, it might just be a delay on mine, but there, yeah, just to show you, that was back when I bought it. Since then, we've turned it organic, so it's not quite as bleak on the stones that you can see there. But this is what it was like, with the amazing view over the castle and just brown schist soils and
amazing
80-year-old Grenache.
And how long from there to the when you started building up? And another question is, did you begin bottling yourself straight away? I mean, as soon as you bought this, you stopped taking it to the cooperative and you started bottling it separately?
In actual fact, no, we started in 2009 was our first vintage. So we had a couple of years where we just left it. It was worked by somebody else who took the grapes to the local cooperative. And then with Jean-Marc, we decided, actually, let's try and see what the quality of the wine is like coming from these old vines here. And that's how we started. So in 2009, we made our first vintage. We made a red and a white, and it went particularly well. So for the quality of the wines, and for our first vintage, we did 8,000 bottles. And then we moved on from there. We started, I think I became a bit of an old vine vineyard collection, because if we move on to the next slide.
Yeah, and tell me how you found them. Did people just start hearing that there's the crazy English lady who's interested in old vines and started telling you about them? Or did you kind of drive around and look? What's the process?
Growers in the locals just could not believe their luck that somebody had come in that wanted to pay for the old vines. We had absolutely no difficulty finding the plots, and we could almost cherry pick the older plots that we wanted and that we liked. And in particular, I tried to buy up any old vine white plots in the village of Tuchan,
because it's so rare. There's so much,
because there were
now.
hardly any left. So I think we have the last plot of Macabeu in the village. We just last year bought some 70-year-old Grenache Gris, and also
I think you have 5 different white grapes. Is that right?
Yeah, Carignan Gris as well. We're very, very fortunate just to have. We have about 800 old vines of Carignan Gris, so we make a varietal Carignan Gris from those vines too. But today we've got quite a collection of the different vines scattered all around the village of Tuchan and the original vine in Moree.
And is this an ongoing process? Are you still looking and buying, or do you feel you've reached the amount that you can?
Yeah, I think now we've definitely, every year I say that, but if something comes up, I just can't. I really feel like I'm on a mission in a way, just to save those vines. I know the vineyard of Grenache Gris that we bought last year, if we hadn't have bought it, it would have been ripped up and replanted with a young vineyard. So, and I know there's some more coming up in next year actually, that are coming up for sale. And every year I say no, and every year, and Jean-Marc definitely says no, because he does most of the work in the vineyard. So
that's brilliant. So let's talk about the commercial side. So when you began, I'm assuming initially you were intending to sell them entirely as you normally would. So you make the wine, you bottle it, you brand it, you sell it. But at some point you decided to do this extra thing, which is adopting the old vines. Now it's a beautiful, beautiful idea. And as I say, I really recommend that everybody listening goes to your site and sees just the way that you present them. Because and I think we can tell just from hearing you talk about them. It's like we're going to Battersea Dogs Home, or it's like we're going, you know, it's so lovely. They've all got their names, and you talk about, not only do you talk about the variety, but what I loved was you also say, I've been mistreated for 50 years. They pushed me to make too much production, and now I'm in the quiet phase of my life now, and I'm giving it. It's so lovely the way you put it. But I'm interested to know how that links commercially. Did you do that because you were finding you just weren't getting enough value added in the marketplace from what you were doing?
Not directly, in a way, because I've always put old vines on the label, or vieille vigne, which perhaps was a mistake to actually put it in French, because it's hard enough to understand the concept in English, let alone having it in French, because most of my wines are sold in the UK.
Point.
So depending on them, so now it's old vines. But I think the wines have always sold, but what I really wanted was to get people to understand the wines and to get a lot more involved in the wines, and to understand, if it says old vines, why is that better? Because some people have even said, well, why is that better? Isn't it better to have a young vine with higher production? And it's like just explaining everything. And it's almost quite a long process, because with COVID, I wasn't able to travel. So I couldn't go onto my usual markets and travel like I did. So I started doing these vineyard rambles.
Yeah. Through Instagram.
Through Instagram Live. And I thought, well, if I can't go and see people, I'm going to bring them into my vineyards. And I started doing every single morning a half-hour Instagram Live ramble around the vineyards. And so I had to read up to have enough sort of material to talk about. I did an awful lot of research into the vines and the history behind that particular vineyard, or the person that owned it before, or why that particular grape variety had disappeared, and just the general history.
And where were you going to for that kind of information? Are there archives that you were looking at? I mean, where were you finding it?
It was mainly that
asking neighbours.
Yeah, there's hardly any documentation at all. There's one book been written about Tuchan over like the last century, but that was sort of people's experiences. I think they interviewed the older generation in Tuchan and wrote down their memoirs. So there is a lot about the vineyard, because that's all people do here in Tuchan. That's a major economy. So there was a lot taken from that. And otherwise, no, it's really difficult. It was people's memories. My father-in-law, Roger, he's I guess he's 85 years old, so he was a mine, and he actually appeared in a lot of the Insta rambles along with my husband Jean-Marc, just to get the knowledge, which it's not written down. And that's another problem we have, is actually getting the age of the vines, because there's no documentation on them, and it's down to people's memories for a lot of it. It's like, well, Roger, with my father-in-law, can you remember who planted this vine? And if he can't remember, then it must be at least 60 years old. So it's not easy getting the information at all.
And are you doing DNA testing? We've had that question a few times this afternoon for our other speakers. Have you done DNA testing on any of them to find out?
Nothing. No, I haven't. And that's what I've found. For me, it's been absolutely fabulous, the conference, because it's given me so much, so many more ideas of what I can do, like the rootstock, the DNA. Yeah. But no, up until now, I haven't. It's been, just the grape variety and walking around the vineyards, and quite I was going to say superficial level in a way. But on the other hand, I think that it's meant that I've been able to be on the same level as the people following me, and eventually buying the wines, because I've been discovering at the same time as well. So it's been a sort of journey and adventure for both of us. And so the Instagram lives were really, really popular. And then from that, I was like, how can I continue this? Because there is such an interest from people on old vines, and they want to know more. And I just wanted to make those old vines like really personal and really almost like people, so that people could really link into them and get to know them. And that's where the idea of the Adopt an Old Vine came up. And I had also been watching a program about dog adoption in the UK called The Dog House or something, in the Dog House. I'd like binge watched it, and it just came to me. I was just like, right, we could do this. We can link them together. And that's where the initial inspiration came from, was why don't we do something a bit off the wall, a bit different?
It's so brilliant. I've got to tell everybody who's
We've got
listening,
it.
in case they haven't seen, is that you get an adoption certificate, you get a fridge magnet, you get a t-shirt that says I adopted an old vine.
Jane, we can do this if you like. If
Okay,
we move
let's
on,
do it.
sorry to interrupt. If we can go to the next slide. These were the great varieties. If we skip on to the adopt an old vine, there's me in one of my vineyards hugging my one.
Actually, Katie, are you looking at the chat box? Because one of the things that's lovely is you've got a few of your old vine adoptees who are
fantastic.
here and listening. Yeah, it's fantastic.
Brilliant. So there's also the Sunshine After Rain project with Naked that is interesting. It's the same idea. I do Insta lives and I do Zooms in the vineyard just to get people to understand all the hard work. They see us putting up the wild boar fence. They see us like strimming with the strimmer rather in the vineyards, and they see the hard work and the ground, the stones, and just the low yields that these vines produce. So, and then the next slide and the next one. So this is the adopt. So here we go. So Jane, we could almost do it. This is the, if you go onto my site, Adopt an Old Vine, this is sort of the page you will come up to, and you can filter between the color, the variety, the vineyard, and if it has to be unadopted. But here, for example, you have the choice between Marie-Thérèse, Laurent, Anaïs, Alcide, and there's actually 200 vines on my website like this at the moment.
And how have you picked which ones?
So I've done what I call adoption rows. I've taken a selection of the vineyards. So I've got, I think it's 6 different vineyards, so that people then have the choice of the wine, which obviously comes from that particular vineyard as well. So that was the initial choice. And then within the vineyard, I fell out with my husband about this because he said, I think he's downstairs as well, but Jean-Marc said that I should go for those vines that look the healthiest and they've got, the potential with the most grapes and look like lots of.
No, you definitely did the right thing.
And I didn't do that. And so you can see like Anaïs, poor Anaïs here, she really needs a bit of love and affection and a bit of like to be adopted. She's only got one branch left and she's really struggling to produce those grapes. And Alcide as well these were taken a couple of months ago. But so I did it in the end with rows. So I kept it to one particular row and literally I did not discriminate at all between my old vines. I took a photo of every single vine on that particular row. So they're all up there for adoption and they were linked with the wine that I make from each vineyard.
But important to say that when people adopt the vine, they're not getting, they get a 10% discount, but I think that's something that's really important as well. And again, it takes me back to an idea years ago. I got one of my daughters adopt an animal, I can't remember which one it was, but it was working with the World Wildlife Fund and you adopted, and it was actually to do with the money you paid went towards protecting them in the wild. And that's what I love about your approach here, is you're not saying this is a shortcut to get a case of wine per year. It's for itself. It's for the benefit itself of looking after these vines.
It's very much that, because I researched it before I did it. We can go on to the next picture as well, but I researched it, and all the Adopt an Old Vine or Adopt a Vine programs that I could find were literally just to get you to buy wine. Mm-hmm. And that wasn't my main intention. My main intention was to get people to understand old vines and to understand the concept of vieilles vignes and old vines. And that's why you don't even have to buy the wine. If you don't want to buy the wine, you can just adopt. I think it's €50 to adopt an old vine, and have
that's for a single year, I'm assuming.
So that's for a single year. If you do purchase wine within that year, then the adoption carries on. But you can, just purchase the vine, because with the vine, you also get Instagram lives, you get pictures of your vine, you get the fridge magnet when you sign up. So you have the photo of your vine so you can put it on your fridge, but you get the Instagram lives that I'm doing regularly as well. And also photos on Facebook. I've got a dedicated Facebook group now called Adopt an Old Vine, Domaine Jones, and where you can actually catch up with your old vines. So I will take a photo in each season of the vines that have been adopted and put it on my page. And I am just astounded by the connection that people have made with their old vine. It's just totally amazing. By mistake.
It really is such a delightful story. Tell me who is adopting them.
So I've a lot of my ramblers. So the people that have been following me for the whole year were very keen for this to continue and to actually get to know one particular old vine. So a lot of them came from my ramblers. I also have some honorary journalist members as well. Tim Atkin was the first honorary adopter. He adopted his vine, and you can actually name your vine as well. So you can give your vine a name. He called his Georges Brassens, and he gets regular updates just to see how many grapes Brassens has got, how he's doing, if he's got any fungal disease on his leaves or not. And so we have other journalists as well who now are honorary members of the Old Vine collection. But basically people from the rambles, and then word of mouth. The first
how many adopters do you have today?
So the first wave of adoptions, I put up 100. And so it's 100. If anybody's thinking, oh, I'm going to do this, I just warn you of the work that is involved getting 100 photos of old vines onto the website.
I think I saw there's a waiting list. I'm sure I saw somebody
say
on this that they're on a waiting list.
The first 100 sold out within 4 hours. So
wow.
They went, so I did the adoption waiting list, and the next 100 have just gone out, and I think there's about 30 left on that. So no, the idea has totally it's hit a chord with people, and lots of people name it after their parents or their daughter or their dog, and I've had one couple who have actually made it to Tuchan to meet their old vine, and it was a really emotional moment. They gave it a hug, like the first they did, and they said, we just want to stand here and look at the view from this old vine and what she's looking at. So there is definitely an attachment to an old vine.
I really think it was so clever of Sarah to put this at the end of today, because we've talked about how the challenges of growing them. We've talked about the kind of more technical side and how you protect your young vines so they can become old. And it's so lovely to have this when you actually, the real true emotional connection you get with it, why it's all worthwhile. It's just great. I love it. And is it helping to increase the visibility of your wines generally? So obviously we're saying there's no link directly between buying the wine and adopting, but has it helped in terms of selling your wines at higher prices and in more places?
I mean, I wouldn't say at higher prices necessarily, because we are sort of in the premium market anyway.
Yeah.
But what it has helped, I think, is just recognition with people who, because I have distribution, like with Naked Wines, the Wine Society, and Caviste or wine shops, independents in the UK, for example. But it's meant that people can actually join up and adopt an old vine here, but then they can still support their local wine merchant and go in and find the wine that they've adopted, the vineyard where the wines come from, on the vine that they've adopted. So it's not necessarily they have to buy the wine from me. They can source it and find it through my distributors as well, worldwide, actually. So in Canada, for example, I can't ship wine to Canada, but I do work with Opimian, a wine club in Canada, and there are a lot of their members who have signed up to adopt a vine because they just want to understand more about the wine that they can buy in Canada.
Wow, it's fantastic. It really is.
I can just see somebody's just adopted an old vine as well. I think somebody must have taken a liking to.
Oh, good. That is brilliant. And so tell me what your neighbours think, and if you think this is having an impact in helping the recognition of how important this heritage is more widely around the area.
My neighbours still think I'm completely bonkers and are still very happy that I'm open to buying up old vines and that they don't have to work them. It's still, I mean, sadly to say, in this area, it's such a cooperative dominated area that people just can't afford to keep those old vines going. So I wouldn't have the pretense to say that I'm changing the mentality of the village. I think I might have opened a few eyes where people even doing my Instagram lives around the vineyards, it's like, what is she doing? And I put tags on the vines as well, because they've got the adopter's name on the tag on the
so
vine.
they have a tag, and then the same tag is put onto the
tag
vines.
is in the, yeah, exactly. But I think the locals just think I'm completely balmy, and I don't think that they can't. In a way, they cannot, because of the price of they are getting for the production of the wines. In the cooperative system, they can't look after these old vines as we can.
But you're getting higher prices per bottle than they will be getting from the cooperative. Is there not a recognition that this could be a way to increase the price?
I don't think so. It's so complicated within a cooperative system. It would all be down to selections when the grapes come in, and payments to growers to give them enough money to be actually to make and look after those vineyards. And it's a real shame, because there are some fabulous old vines down here, but the growers are still getting perhaps a small premium to work them, but they need to work those old vines. They need the younger vines to bring in the additional volume so that they get paid enough. So it's a sort of balancing act. But it has been tried to do selections at the local cooperative, and it does work for a while, but we found here that it worked for 10 years, and then you have a financial crisis or the economic crisis, and the first thing that goes out the window is contracts with the growers for the better quality wines. And it's another topic. I could actually go into that on a bigger scale, but
it is so interesting. There's a great comment here from Dr. Paul White, who said that in Pic Saint-Luc, that their cooperative, they do sell old vine bottlings at a premium over the base wines.
Yeah, brilliant.
So, yeah, it is. That's great. That's great to see.
It is possible. And like, I just rectify what I said, that they do have a better quality or a range of wines at the local cooperative. It's not just one quality of wine.
Of course, but they're not necessarily making that the link to being the oldest.
Yeah, it's not necessarily based on the old vines.
Yep. It's something I've noticed we talked about the per hectare land price and how fascinating that was, that you said the difference with what you're paying. Something I've noticed in Bordeaux over the last year, and it really has just been over the most recent figures that came out this year, that you're starting to see a premium for organic. Even if you're in the Côte de Bordeaux, the prices where you're not paying very much per hectare, but you're starting to see higher prices being paid for organic vineyards than you are for non-organic. And that's new, and I think incredibly positive. And hopefully that could, that can be something which we'll see for old vines compared to young vines.
Yeah, no, that would, but I don't think it's going to be while I'm in Tuchan. I don't know, a premium for old vines. It's just, yeah, it's a long way away, I think.
And so tell me about the viticulture. What's involved? So when you bought, you turned it over to organic. Was that an immediate decision? And why was that? What was the reason? And yeah, just talk us through the process.
Yeah, I think basically it was just a belief that myself and Jean-Marc had, that we wanted to farm organically for the vineyards, for the vines, but also for our health. As I said, it's Jean-Marc who does most of the work in the vineyards, so very much for his health as well. And previously he had worked conventional farming, and we wanted to get out of that. So when he left the cooperative as well, we turned and did organic. But it's really different. It's challenging down here. There's, as I said, there's no water, so any competition for the vines with weeds can lead, you can't cover crop. It's very difficult because there's no irrigation. So any competition for in the vineyards, you basically have to get rid of it. So my old vines obviously are planted a horse width apart rather than a modern day tractor apart. So for ploughing, we've actually had to buy a 50-year-old Chuniard tractor to actually get between the rows of vines. As they're tiny little plots as well, you think of that map that we saw at the beginning, they're scattered around probably about 20 kilometers. So they're tiny little plots surrounded by hedgerows that need maintenance. And for example, we have wild boar here are the major pest. We need to put fences up against the wild boar. So we have like 14 little tiny plots that we have to go to put the wild boar fences up. Plus we have to go and check the batteries on all of those old vine vineyards too, to make sure that they're still working. So logistically, just in terms of traveling between the vineyards and maintaining them and looking after them, there's a lot more work to be done.
Yes, I'm sure. And do you have is it just you and your husband who are doing that work?
It's mainly Jean-Marc doing that. And then we do have a tractor driver, fortunately, Michel from the village, absolutely brilliant. He knows how to drive the chenillard as well. So, and I think in the village, we were people laughed at us because we've gone backwards in their eyes. We've sort of gone backwards by buying an old chenillard. Other people are selling their chenillard and we're sort of buying it. We're powdering sulphur by hand, whereas other people have got their tractors and they spray it. So we're sort of seen as going in the wrong direction, if you like, in our particular area.
Yeah, but this is part of the bigger agriculture discussion at the moment.
Yeah, of course.
And
they
the
have
fight
different
between
objectives.
bigger. Yeah,
exactly. They have different objectives. It's not the same. They don't control the final product. They don't control the selling. So it's completely different scheme.
Yeah. In fact, let's talk about that, because I think that's we've talked about the more recent Adopt a Vine scheme, which is one of the lovely things I think we can say that has grown out of the difficulties of the last year. I mean, people have learned to be imaginative and to find new ways to reach their consumers, and this has proved a brilliant and really inspirational way to do so. But if we just go back to the beginning of when you started your domain, and you'd already known that you wanted to make the fact that they were old vines, that was the point of difference. How did you, in terms of marketing, in terms of finding the market, how did you connect right back then with the idea they were old vines and trying to sell at a higher price?
Yeah, I really think, I mean, for me, the Old Vine Conference and everything that has been discussed this time and last time has been a major turning point, because up until then, even myself, I put old vines on the label and I talked about it, but I did sort of feel that people weren't understanding and there was no momentum behind it. And they were more sold on the quality of the wine than they were on the fact that it said old vines on them, because of the sort of lack of understanding of old vines and what benefits they bring to the final product. So as I say, it was on the label, and I don't have young vines. That's the other thing as well. All of my parcels are old vines. There's no young vines.
What's the youngest?
45.
Okay. And the oldest?
116.
And everything that I've seen is bush vines. Is that right across everything?
Yeah, we do have some Syrah. They're the younger ones, the 45-year-old, which we have to train on wires. But apart from those, everything else is bush vine, Gobelet.
And we have some questions of, have you considered biodynamic? And so going one further step.
Yeah, we have considered it. And it's something that we are going to look at, and we do. There are certain things in the biodynamic that we would love to be doing in the vineyards, and we are going to look at it, whether we go fully biodynamic. Unfortunately for us, it's a question of time, and it's not a question of belief, because we do believe that's better, but it's time and actually looking after the amount of vineyards that we have realistically. And again, I suppose it comes down to the price of the wines we get, because yes, my wines are sold at a premium. It's a premium for Languedoc. My wines are sold between £15 and up to £40. So we're not talking, they're not like premium. They're, and so there is a limit as well to even selling at those prices to what you can do in the vineyards, because our living comes from that. So we have to make a living from these vines. It has to stay commercially viable. So, and
yes, in fact, I mean, it's almost a completely ridiculous question when you think about the number of expenses that are involved in running a vineyard. But is there something that you specifically earmark? Well, it's €50 a year to adopt an old vine. Is there a specific thing that you're earmarking that money for, or does it just? We all know how much will be involved in running your estate.
It's because perhaps I want to make that a bit clearer, but the €50 basically covers the cost of the adoption pack that you get. And
I did wonder that when I saw it, all the lovely things you give to people. And I wondered, are you getting anything at the end of that?
It's not a crowdfunding idea, just to make that sort of clear. It really is sort of to get people to understand the wines and to want to buy them. We are not, you know, the €50, the time I've spent trying to locate the Philippe in the vineyard because I've lost him and I can't find him and the owner wants a photo of him, and just the cost of the actual pack, and now sending to the UK it's quite expensive as well. So no, I would say that I'm not doing it to make money out of the adoption. I'm doing it in the long term hope that it will bring understanding to old vines and to my vineyards, and so get consumers to purchase the wines.
What are the things that you think people, or that you have found that people are most interested in or surprised by when you're explaining to them about?
I think just the hard work that goes into maintaining the vines. I think my ramblers, a lot of them just had absolutely no idea of all the hard work and how manual it is as well. I mean, we strim the vineyards, even the weeding, we do it by hand sometimes. So it's actually hand weeding in some of the vineyards. It's so stony, it's so rocky, it's so dry, and it's so difficult. It's so difficult to produce grapes and wines down here. So I think they took that on board. I think also that old vines, that Jean-Philippe said as well, they're a mixture in the vineyards. When I talk about my Carignan vineyard, there's lots of tiny little other vines in there as well. It's not 100% Carignan. I think there's probably about 20% Grenache, probably a bit of Lledoner Pelut in there as well, the occasional Macabeu. And I think people have been surprised by that too, of the mixture. And just even myself, just the variety, the different shapes, the different sizes. That sounds a bit, but of the vines, they're all different, they're all individual, and they're all very, very different.
It's fantastic. And as I was looking through the names, I wondered, are any of them named after the people who originally planted them? I mean, how much do you know about the
I would love to go into that sort of detail, but what the names that are there are actually the names that come from the most popular first names in 1905. So in 1905, those first names were top of the list in popularity for first names. And I chose 1905 because...
Oh, that's a nice idea. Okay,
yeah,
great. And where did you find that?
On the internet. There's a site that has
good old internet.
a list of all the names per year of which one was the most popular. And 1905, I selected 1905 because at the Carve Cooperative, they did try and classify the vineyards at one stage. I think it's about 40 years ago. And when they didn't have any history of the vineyard, they just put down 1905 as the planting date for that.
The most likely.
Yeah, because nobody could remember, so they put 1905. So that's where I looked up for the first names. But I love it. But then you can rename it as well if you're not happy with the name. It's not a problem at all.
And do you find you get a lot of interest here and in the UK where you're selling a lot of it? You have lots, but are you finding the French? I don't mean your local winemakers. I mean the French public more generally. Are you feeling that there's a recognition of old vines and a respect for old vines from French buyers?
I think it's difficult for me to reply on that because my markets are mainly the UK. Okay. So, and we're Tuchan, so it's a long way from sort of the major markets. So I can't.
It hasn't been a way to connect more with the local market.
If I ask somebody locally, they'll say vieille vigne, it's a negative. It's a definite negative. The vineyards down here, they were called les galères, as in nightmares, because they're so difficult to work. So I think nobody locally is actually going to look out for an old wine because there's no sort of connotation of quality.
Yeah, it is interesting, but you think Condrieu, Côte Rôtie, those kind of areas which have absolutely managed to give back premium to the more difficult parts, which were so hard to plant that people gave up on them, and they're going back to them. So there obviously is a huge potential for that to happen. And I now feel like I need to go around to every one of your neighbours and say to them, you need to see what Katie is doing.
Yeah, no, it'd be lovely. But
Yeah, well, it's amazing. I'm going to check with Sarah again. Sarah, are there questions that you would like to add in, please? And before or while you're kind of gathering any, Sarah, can I ask what your plans are now, Katie? What do you see as the challenges? What do you see are your next steps? And for anyone who's watching who hasn't yet gone to your site, how can they go about adopting a vine?
Oh, it's really easy. You just Google Domaine Jones, and on the website there's a page, it says adopt an old vine, or just Google Domaine Jones adopt an old vine and you'll end up on my page. So there's only 30 left up for adoption, because what I hadn't realized is the logistical, it takes a lot of time to do those. But I think for the future, I've only just started what I want to do with the adopt an old vine idea. And my aim is to, throughout the year, to give vine parents an update on their old vine, so they really get an idea of all the work that's done on the old vine, the diseases that it can get. And now with the conference, I've got a lot more material of what I can tell them. I could try and work out what the rootstock is on them and do the DNA. And so I've just at the very, very beginning, I think, of the potential of all the stories and the history that these old vines have got to tell their parents. And that's where I see myself going, in that direction, at least for the next year, until I have another idea on how I can do it.
Well, it's